Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today.
Great to be here.
This is where we, take these really complex topics, try to unpack them, and hopefully make them genuinely fascinating and understandable for you. I'm your host, and today we're embarking on a really critical exploration. We're looking into the world of Internet of Things, security, and privacy.
Yeah, big one.
Huge. If you've been following our series, you'll remember our last deep dive focused on data analytics and visualization for Internet of Things. Valuable stuff. But today, we're kind of confronting what you might call the dark side of universal connectivity. Sounds a bit dramatic, but it's true.
It really is. The stakes are high.
We're talking about the absolutely critical importance of IoT security and privacy, especially when you think about how deeply it's woven into national critical infrastructure. Things like the power grid, banking systems, certainly here in Canada and elsewhere.
Absolutely essential services.
Exactly. So our mission today is pretty clear. We're going to dissect the primary threats facing these IoT ecosystems. We'll identify common vulnerabilities for the weak spots.
Yeah, the ones that keep cropping up.
We'll explain the fundamental protection mechanisms, the shields and locks, and we'll even try to glimpse some emerging technologies that might just redefine this whole space.
Looking ahead a bit.
Right. And to do that, we'll navigate this pretty complex landscape using a structured Q&A format. I think that'll help keep things clear.
Good plan.
So here's a roadmap of the core questions we'll be tackling today. I'll list them all out first, and we'll dive into each one. First, what are some of the primary threats that IoT systems face? Second, how did that infamous Mirai Botnet attack work, and what type of threat was it really? Third, what's considered the single most common and maybe most dangerous vulnerability in IoT devices? Fourth, besides weak passwords, because we all know about those, what other common vulnerabilities plague IoT systems? Fifth, what's the very first line of defense against threats like, say, eavesdropping and data tampering? Sixth, we mentioned TLS. How exactly does TLS provide security? What's it actually doing? Seventh, encryption protects data moving around, sure, but how do we control which devices can even connect and what they're allowed to do once they're in? Eighth, what's seen as the gold standard method for authenticating potentially millions of IoT devices at scale? Ninth, all right, so a device is authenticated. What's the core principle that should govern its authorization, what it could actually do? 10th, how do modern IoT platforms actually implement this principle, the principle of least privilege? 11th.
Looking at emerging tech now, what exactly is blockchain? And what are its core concepts? Lots of buzz there. 12th, what are the potential benefits, if any, of using blockchain specifically for IoT security? 13th, and the flip side, what are the significant challenges right now that limit using blockchain in IoT? And finally, number 14. To wrap up our security discussion, what's the ultimate challenge here? And what are the cornerstones of a really robust defense?
That's a comprehensive list. Covers the key ground.
Okay, let's dive straight in then. The attack surface of IoT is, it's unprecedentedly vast, isn't it? Every single connected device, from a tiny sensor to a complex industrial gateway, is a potential foothold for attackers.
It really is mind-boggling when you think about the scale.
So let's begin with that modern battlefield. What are some of the primary threats that IoT systems face today?
Right. That's a crucial starting point because, you can't defend against what you don't understand, can you? Our source material really highlights 4 key categories of threats that define this battlefield. First up, we have eavesdropping. This is essentially data interception. It's, a passive attack. But just imagine someone listening in on insecure channels.
Like over unencrypted Wi-Fi or something.
Exactly. Or between a device and a gateway, or gateway and cloud, if it's not secured. And the consequences, you could be intercepting sensitive medical data from a wearable device, or proprietary operational data from factory sensors, even login credentials being sent in the clear. It's like leaving your private conversations wide open.
And it's probably not just about passively listening, right? If someone can listen, the next logical step is often to, mess with the information.
Precisely. That leads us straight into data tampering.
Yeah.
This is an active attack, a significant step up from just eavesdropping. Here, the attacker intercepts the communication and actively alters it before maybe forwarding it on.
Okay, give me an example. How bad could that be?
Think about this. An attacker intercepts a command going to your smart lock. They can just block it so your door doesn't unlock. Or, much worse, imagine a chemical plant. An attacker changes a critical temperature sensor reading from danger back down to normal.
Oh.
Yeah, the system thinks everything's fine, but really, you could be heading towards a catastrophic failure. It completely undermines the integrity of the system. You end up trusting data that's been maliciously altered. Scary stuff.
That is scary. And once you can tamper with data, I suppose the next step for an attacker might be just to pretend to be someone or something else entirely. What about spoofing?
Spoofing, yeah, or impersonation. It's terrifyingly effective in IoT. This is where one device or even a user masquerades as another legitimate one.
So like a fake sensor.
Exactly. Imagine spoofing a legitimate sensor to inject completely false data into a factory's analytics system. Your operational insights, totally poisoned. You're making decisions based on lies.
Not that enough?
Or, maybe even more dangerously, think about an attacker impersonating a central command center. They could send malicious commands out to a whole fleet of devices. Imagine instructing smart meters across an entire city to just shut off power.
That's critical infrastructure level impact.
Absolutely. The fundamental trust and identity, which is so crucial for IoT to function, is just completely broken by spoofing.
And finally, sometimes attackers just want to break things, right? Bring a system down through brute force.
That's where the classic denial of service, DoS, and its bigger cousin, distributed denial of service, DDoS attacks come in. A DoS attack is all about making a resource, a server, a device, a network link unavailable. How? By overwhelming it with traffic, just flooding it until it can't respond to legitimate requests anymore.
And DDoS just ramps that up.
Exactly. DDoS amplifies this massively by using a botnet. That's a large army of compromised computers, or increasingly, IoT devices themselves. They all attack the target simultaneously from loads of different points online.
Making it much harder to block.
Much harder, and for IoT this is particularly dangerous. Why? Because many IoT devices have very limited resources, CPU, memory, network bandwidth. They're incredibly susceptible to being overwhelmed, and their sheer number makes them really potent weapons when conscripted into these botnets. It's about shutting things down through sheer unadulterated volume.
And when we talk about that kind of overwhelming force, especially using compromised IoT devices, one name almost always comes up: Mirai.
Mirai. Yeah.
Our source material mentions the Mirai Botnet right at the beginning. Can you walk us through what made Mirai such a significant wake-up call? And what type of threat was it, fundamentally?
Absolutely. Mirai was, you could say, the quintessential IoT distributed denial of service, the DDoS attack that really put IoT security on the map for a lot of people. It was this stark demonstration of how these ubiquitous, seemingly harmless devices, cameras, routers, could be weaponized on a truly unprecedented scale.
A real wake-up call, as you said.
Definitely. A wake-up call to the sort of unseen vulnerabilities lurking in all these connected devices we were bringing into our homes and businesses.
So how did it actually operate? What was the mechanism behind it?
It was brutally simple, which is almost the most frightening part. It basically just scanned the internet, constantly looking for IoT devices, webcams, DVRs, smart home hubs, you name it, that were still using their weak factory default passwords.
Like admin or password?
Exactly. Those kinds of things. Things people rarely, if ever, change. Once Mirai found a vulnerable device, it infected it with malware, basically enslaving it, conscripting it into this massive botnet army.
An army of compromised cameras and DVRs.
And the army of everyday things. And this botnet army was then directed to flood its targets with just an overwhelming amount of traffic. And the targets were huge, major sites like Twitter, Netflix, the New York Times, DIN, which was a major DNS provider.
Right, I remember that outage. It took down a lot of the internet.
It did. These sites became completely inaccessible, effectively crippled for hours. And what's really unsettling, like you've hinted at before, is that Mirai's success wasn't down to some super sophisticated zero-day exploit that nobody knew about. No. It came down almost entirely to exploiting a ridiculously simple yet incredibly pervasive weakness: that failure to change default credentials.
Which leads us perfectly to the next point. Mirai really highlighted this fundamental flaw. So what is considered that single most common and arguably most dangerous vulnerability we see in IoT devices time and time again?
Oh, this one absolutely hits home for anyone who's ever, set up a home router and maybe forgotten to change the default password. It's that classic admin problem, isn't it?
It really is. Still.
The single most common and dangerous vulnerability, according to our sources, and frankly just observation, remains weak, guessable, or hard-coded credentials. It sounds almost too simple to be the biggest threat, but it consistently is.
Why is it so common, though? Is it just users being lazy?
That's part of it, but not the whole story. Many, especially low-cost IoT devices, are deliberately shipped with these infamous default usernames and passwords. Things like admin, user users, root password, And yes, users often just never bother to change them. It's like leaving your front door wide open with the key taped right next to the handle, maybe with a little sign saying, "Please come on in."
It's hard to believe it's still that bad. But you also mentioned hard-coded. That sounds even worse than just lazy users.
It gets worse, exactly. Sometimes these credentials aren't just defaults you can change, they're hard-coded directly into the device's firmware, baked right in.
Meaning you can't change them easily.
Or it's extremely difficult, maybe impossible without a firmware update, which might never come, and attackers know how to extract firmware and find these hidden credentials. The Mirai Botnet, going back to that example, it succeeded almost entirely by just trying a list of maybe a few dozen common default credentials. That's all it took to build that massive army.
So it's not just user negligence, it's a systemic issue too.
Absolutely. It's a systemic failure. It's often rooted in a market that heavily prioritizes low manufacturing costs and getting products out the door quickly over implementing fundamental security practices. It's like they're externalizing the security costs, pushing it onto the consumer, and frankly, onto the entire internet infrastructure that then has to deal with these vulnerable devices.
Okay, so weak credentials are, depressingly, still number one. But beyond those basic password issues, which are shockingly common and, as Mirai showed, devastatingly effective, there must be other cracks in the armor, right? What other common vulnerabilities plague these IoT systems?
Oh, definitely. Weak credentials might be the most common door left open, but there are plenty of other ways attackers can get in or cause problems. A huge one, and critically important for the long-term health and security of any IoT deployment, is the lack of a secure update mechanism.
You mean like patching software?
Exactly. The threat landscape is constantly evolving, right? A device might be perfectly secure the day you install it, but tomorrow someone could discover a critical vulnerability in its software or firmware. If the manufacturer doesn't have a secure and reliable way to deliver updates, usually over the air or OTA updates, then those devices are just stuck. They're permanently vulnerable once they're out in the field.
Millions of ticking time bombs, potentially.
That's a good way to put it. It's like building a fortress but completely forgetting to include a way to bring in reinforcements or repair the walls when new siege weapons are developed. You're just left exposed.
That's a critical point.
Yeah.
A device isn't static. It needs to evolve defensively.
Mm-hmm.
What else? What other vulnerabilities?
Then there are insecure network services. This is another common one. Many IoT devices, often to save development time or maybe due to poor design, run unnecessary network services on open ports. And these services often have known well-documented vulnerabilities.
So they're exposing more than they need to.
Precisely. Proper secure design dictates that only the absolute essential ports and services needed for the device to function should be exposed to the network. Anything extra is just an unnecessary entry point for attackers, turning what should be a minimal attack surface into this sprawling, vulnerable landscape, inviting trouble.
Okay, that makes sense. You also mentioned insecure hardware earlier. This one's interesting because it involves physical access, which maybe people don't think about as much in a world focused on remote cyber attacks.
Yeah, absolutely. We often focus on software, but the hardware itself can be a vulnerability. Devices often have exposed debugging ports left accessible on the circuit board, things like JTAG or UART ports.
What can attackers do with those?
These interfaces provide deep, low-level access to the device's internals. They can often bypass software protections entirely. So if an attacker can get physical access to the device, maybe steal it, or access it during maintenance, these ports can give them potentially complete control. They can often extract the entire firmware, find cryptographic keys stored inside, read sensitive data, or even overwrite the device's software with their own malicious version. It's like leaving a master key to the entire building just lying around in the server room itself.
Physical security still matters, even for IoT.
It really does. And finally, there's a crucial area that's often blurred with security but is distinct privacy concerns.
Right. How does privacy fit in as a vulnerability?
Well, it's not strictly a technical security vulnerability like letting an attacker access the system, but the sheer volume and sensitivity of data collected by many IoT devices pose immense privacy risks, which you could argue is a vulnerability in the trust relationship. Think about your smart home. It learns incredibly intimate details about your life.
Like when I'm home, what I watch.
Exactly. When you're home, when you're away, what you watch, maybe even what you talk about if there's a microphone involved. Now, if this data is breached by hackers, or even if it's misused by the company that collected it, the consequences can be severe. We're talking about potential surveillance, discrimination, maybe your insurance rates go up based on lifestyle data, or just profound personal embarrassment.
And the lack of transparency is key here.
That's a huge part of the vulnerability. The lack of transparency from manufacturers about exactly what data they're collecting, how they're using it, who they're sharing it with. That's not just an ethical oversight, it's a profound systemic vulnerability. It undermines consumer trust, and it opens the door to all sorts of manipulative practices, from hyper-targeted advertising based on your private moments to potentially discriminatory decisions based on deeply personal patterns gleaned from seemingly innocuous smart devices.
Okay, wow. So we have eavesdropping, tampering, spoofing, DDoS, weak credentials, lack of updates, insecure services, hardware issues, and these huge privacy concerns. It's quite a minefield.
It definitely can be if not managed properly.
So, with all these threats and vulnerabilities swirling around, what's our first line of defense? What's the absolute foundational layer we need to put in place against those initial threats like eavesdropping and data tampering?
The simple yet incredibly powerful answer is encryption. That's your first, most fundamental line of defense.
Just scrambling the data.
Essentially, yes. Encryption is the process of scrambling data using mathematical algorithms so that it can only be read or unscrambled by authorized parties who possess the correct key. It's like writing your sensitive messages in a secret code that only you and your intended recipient know how to decipher. Anyone else looking just sees gibberish.
And the standard technology for this in the IoT world and on the web generally is TLS, right? Transport Layer Security.
That's the one. TLS is the fundamental technology for securing communications in IoT. Many listeners might know its older, now deprecated predecessor, SSL, Secure Sockets Layer. But today, TLS is the standard.
And it's like that padlock icon you see in your web browser.
Exactly. When you see that little padlock icon in your browser's address bar, that signifies your connection to the website is secured using TLS. The same fundamental technology, the same principles, are absolutely essential for securing communications between IoT devices, gateways, and cloud platforms.
Okay, so we know TLS is essential. But how exactly does it provide security? You mentioned encryption, but it feels like it must be doing more than just scrambling data, right? Especially if it stops tampering and spoofing, too.
You're absolutely right. TLS is a suite of security services, really. It offers 3 core guarantees, and it's this combination that makes it so powerful. First, as we said, there's encryption. This provides confidentiality.
Keeping secret.
Precisely. It ensures that any data transmitted between your IoT device and the cloud platform, or between any 2 points using TLS, is completely unreadable to any third party who might intercept it. This stops eavesdropping dead in its tracks. If they capture the data, it just looks like random noise without the key.
Okay, confidentiality. What's next?
Second, and crucially, TLS provides authentication. This is absolutely vital. It allows the client, like an IoT device, to verify the identity of the server it's connecting to, and often, vice versa, the server can verify the device's identity too.
How does that stop spoofing?
Because it uses digital certificates, which we'll probably talk more about later. The server presents its certificate, proving it is who it claims to be. This actively prevents those impersonation or spoofing attacks we discussed. You can be confident you're actually talking to your legitimate cloud platform, not some attacker pretending to be it.
Got it. Confidentiality, authentication. What's the third leg of the stool?
The third is integrity. This means TLS ensures that the data has not been altered accidentally or maliciously while it was in transit.
How does it do that?
It uses something called a message authentication code, or MA. Think of it like a unique, cryptographically secure checksum or digital fingerprint for the data being sent. The sender calculates the MA, sends it with the data. The receiver recalculates the MA on the received data. If the 2 MAs match, the data hasn't been tampered with. If they don't match, the data is rejected. This stops data tampering attacks cold. It ensures the commands you send are exactly the commands that arrive, and the sensor data you receive is genuine.
Okay, so those 3 things together, confidentiality, authentication, integrity, are powerful. How does a connection actually get set up with TLS?
It happens through a process called the TLS handshake. When 2 devices first connect, they perform this brief negotiation. They agree on which specific encryption algorithms they'll use, they authenticate each other, usually at least the server is authenticated, and they securely exchange the cryptographic keys they'll use for the rest of the session.
And once the handshake is done?
Once the handshake is complete, they've established a secure encrypted session. All the actual application data, the sensor readings, the commands then flows back and forth within this secure tunnel. Everything inside is protected by those 3 guarantees: confidentiality, integrity, and authentication.
So implementing TLS everywhere is basically step one.
It's absolutely a non-negotiable, foundational requirement for any secure IoT system. It truly is the bedrock upon which other security measures are built. Without it, you're just broadcasting in the clear.
Okay, so TLS and encryption protect the data while it's moving around. That's huge. But that's just one piece of the puzzle, isn't it?
Definitely.
We still need to control who is even allowed to connect to our systems in the first place, and then what they are allowed to do once they are connected. How do we manage that side of things, controlling access and permissions?
Right. Now we're moving into the domain of authentication and authorization. These two terms are often lumped together, but they represent distinct, equally vital functions for robust security. You need both.
Okay, let's break those down then. What exactly do we mean by authentication in the context of IoT? Define that for us.
Sure. Authentication fundamentally answers the question, who are you? It's the entire process of verifying the claimed identity of a device, or sometimes a user, trying to connect to your system.
So proving it's a legitimate device.
Exactly. In IoT, we need to be absolutely certain that the specific device connecting to our cloud platform is a legitimate, trusted device that we know and manage, and not some imposter, maybe a rogue device or an attacker's machine trying to gain unauthorized access or inject malicious data or commands. Without strong authentication, knowing who you're talking to, all your other security measures like encryption and authorization are fundamentally weakened because they might be applied to the wrong entity.
Okay, so authentication is about verifying identity. Once that identity is confirmed, what's the role of authorization?
Once you've reliably established who the device is through authentication, authorization kicks in. Authorization answers the next critical question. Okay, now that I know who you are, what are you actually allowed to do?
Permissions, basically.
Exactly. It's all about defining and enforcing the rules, the policies, about what specific actions or operations a particular authenticated device is permitted to perform. It ensures that even a legitimate authenticated device can only do the things it's supposed to do and nothing more. It prevents, say, a temperature sensor from trying to access billing information or a smart light bulb from trying to disarm the security system.
Got it. Authentication proves who you are. Authorization determines what you can do. Both critical.
Both absolutely critical, working hand in hand.
So, given the sheer scale of IoT deployments, we keep coming back to this, but we could be talking millions, maybe billions of devices eventually. How do you handle that first step, authentication effectively and securely? Doing it one by one seems impossible. It was considered the gold standard method for authenticating IoT devices at scale.
Yeah, scale is the killer app and the killer challenge for IoT security, isn't it? We've definitely seen the pitfalls of weak authentication methods. For instance, trying to authenticate a device based just on its MBC address. That's trivial to spoof. A MACI address is just a label, easily changed in software. It offers almost no real security.
So what's better, but maybe still not ideal?
Well, slightly better methods involve using long, unique pre-shared keys, or PSKs. Each device gets a secret key that only it and the server know. That's certainly stronger than a MAC address. But imagine the logistics. Managing potentially millions or billions of unique secret keys, securely provisioning them, rotating them, revoking them if a device is compromised. It becomes a massive, complex, and error-prone key management challenge, a significant logistical nightmare.
Okay, so PSKs are better, but don't scale well administratively. What's the solution then? What's the gold standard?
The consensus, and what our source material points to as the gold standard for authenticating IoT devices reliably and scalably, is the use of X.509 certificates.
It's like the certificates websites use for HTTPS TLS.
Exactly like those, but applied to devices. This is widely considered the most robust and scalable method for strong device authentication. How it works is that each individual IoT device is provisioned, ideally during manufacturing, with its own unique X.509 digital certificate. This certificate contains the device's public key and identity information, and crucially, it's cryptographically signed by a trusted certificate authority, or CA.
So the CA vouches for the device's identity.
Precisely. Think of the X.509 certificate as an unforgeable digital passport for each device. When the device connects to the server and performs that TLS handshake we talked about, it presents its certificate. The server can verify the CA's signature and be very confident that the certificate is authentic and belongs to a legitimate device under its management. It provides strong, undeniable proof of identity, scales beautifully, and leverages a well-understood public key infrastructure.
Yeah. That sounds much more manageable and secure for large fleets. Okay, so the device presents its digital passport, the X.509 certificate. and gets authenticated. Now we know who it is. What's the core principle that should govern what it's allowed to do next? We don't want that authenticated temperature sensor suddenly unlocking doors, right?
Exactly. You've hit on a fundamental security concept that applies way beyond just IoT, but it's absolutely critical here. The core principle that must govern authorization is the principle of least privilege.
Least privilege. Heard that term before. What does it really mean in practice for, say, an IoT device?
It means exactly what it sounds like. Each component of a system, in this case, each IoT device, should be granted only the absolute minimum set of permissions, access rights, or privileges necessary to perform its specific, intended function, and absolutely no more.
Can you give a concrete IoT example?
Sure. Let's take that temperature sensor again. Its specific function is to measure temperature and report it. So, under the principle of least privilege, it should be authorized only to publish data to a specific temperature topic or endpoint in the cloud. It should have no permissions whatsoever to, say, subscribe to command topics, access user databases, or send a command to unlock a smart door, even if that door system is part of the same overall platform.
Why is that so important?
Because it dramatically limits the potential damage if that device ever gets compromised. If an attacker manages to take over that temperature sensor, the only thing they can do with its credentials and network access is send bogus temperature readings. They can't use it as a jumping-off point to attack other parts of the system because the sensor simply doesn't have the permissions. It's all about granular control and minimizing the blast radius of any single component failure or compromise.
That makes perfect sense. Containment through minimal permissions. So, how do the modern IoT platforms, the big cloud services, actually put this principle of least privilege into practice? How do they manage potentially millions of unique permission sets across vast fleets of devices?
That's where the power of modern IoT platforms really shines. Services like AWS IoT Core or Azure IoT Hub, they implement this principle using very fine-grained, policy-based control. It's designed for scale and flexibility.
Policy-based control. How does that work from, say, an administrator's point of view? How do they set it up?
Typically, an administrator writes a specific policy document for a device, or more often, a group of devices with similar functions. These policies are often written in a structured format, like JSON, which is easy for machines to parse. This policy document is then electronically attached or associated directly with the device's identity, like its X.509 certificate.
And what does the policy actually do? What's inside it?
The policy explicitly defines exactly which actions are allowed or denied for that identity. For example, it might state, allow for the action ILIT, publish, which means sending data, but only to a very specific resource, like the MQTT topic Factory Floor 1 Motor 7 telemetry. And just a quick note for listeners, MQTT is a super common, lightweight messaging protocol used in IoT, designed specifically for constrained devices and unreliable networks.
So the policy might say, this motor sensor can only publish to its own telemetry topic and nothing else.
Exactly that level of granularity. It might explicitly deny subscribe, receiving commands, or deny access to any other topics or resources. The platform's authorization engine then checks this policy every single time the device tries to perform any action. If the action isn't explicitly allowed by the policy attached to its identity, it's denied, period.
So this really ensures that even if a device does get compromised somehow, maybe through a vulnerability we missed or that hard-coded credential we talked about, the potential damage it can inflict, is strictly limited by its predefined authorization policy.
Precisely. It's like putting a very specific, rigid firewall around exactly what that compromised device is allowed to attempt, even after an attacker gets initial access. It minimizes the impact of a breach, hopefully turning what could be a catastrophe into a much more contained, manageable incident. It's a cornerstone of secure system design at scale.
Okay, that's a really clear picture of the standard defenses.
Yeah.
TLS for the connection, X.509 for authentication, and least privilege policies for authorization. Now, as the IoT landscape keeps evolving, there are always emerging technologies being explored for how they might enhance security. Let's touch on one that generates a lot of discussion, maybe sometimes more hype than reality for IoT right now.
Yeah.
Blockchain.
Ah, yes. Blockchain definitely gets a lot of airtime.
So just to level set, what is blockchain fundamentally, and what are its core concepts that make people think about it for security?
Right. So at its very core, blockchain is fundamentally a distributed, immutable ledger. Think of it like a shared digital record book that's copied across many computers in a network. It gained fame mostly through cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, But the underlying technology has some really interesting properties when you think about trust and security, especially for distributed systems, which IoT certainly is.
Okay, distributed and immutable. Let's unpack those core concepts. What does distributed or decentralized mean here?
Decentralized is key. Unlike traditional databases or systems where there's usually one central server or authority controlling the data, in a blockchain, the ledger, that record book of all transactions, is maintained concurrently by many participants or nodes in the network. Everyone holds a copy or at least has access to verify it.
And the benefit of that?
The big benefit is eliminating the single point of failure or control. If one node goes offline or is compromised, the network as a whole keeps functioning because the data is replicated across many other nodes. This inherent redundancy makes it potentially more resilient than traditional centralized systems.
Okay, that's decentralization. What about the immutable part? That sounds important for security.
Immutable is the other cornerstone. It means that once a transaction, like a piece of data or a record, is validated by the network and added to the ledger in a block, it's cryptographically linked to the previous block, forming that chain of blocks, hence the name blockchain.
And you can't change the past blocks.
Effectively, no. Because of the cryptography used, hashing, and the distributed nature, altering a transaction that's already been recorded deep in the chain would require an attacker to recompute not only that block, but all subsequent blocks, and convince a majority of the network to accept their altered version. This is designed to be computationally infeasible, practically impossible for well-established blockchains. This creates a highly reliable, tamper-proof, or tamper-evident audit trail. You can trust that the history recorded on the blockchain hasn't been secretly changed.
Okay, so distributed for resilience, immutable for trust and auditability. Given those concepts, what are the potential benefits that blockchain could theoretically offer if applied to IoT security challenges? Where might it actually help?
Well, it's important to stress the theoretically and could, because, as we'll discuss, the practical hurdles are significant. But blockchain could potentially offer benefits in some very specific areas where its unique properties really align with an IoT need. One potential area is decentralized device management and access control. Imagine using a blockchain to manage device identities, credentials, or access permissions without relying solely on a single central cloud platform or authority.
How would that increase resilience?
Because if that central authority goes down or gets compromised, your whole system isn't necessarily crippled. The devices might still be able to authenticate or verify permissions based on the distributed ledger. It could potentially increase resilience against large-scale outages or targeted attacks on central infrastructure.
Interesting. What else? Where else might the immutability aspect be useful?
The immutability could offer enhanced data integrity for certain applications. Think about scenarios where you need an extremely high degree of trust and auditability for the data trail. A classic example is complex supply chain tracking.
Like tracking pharmaceuticals or high-value goods?
Exactly. Storing key IoT sensor readings or shipment transfer events as transactions on a blockchain could provide a verifiable, immutable record of a product's entire journey from its origin through manufacturing, shipping, all the way to the end consumer. Every important step, every temperature reading, every handover could be permanently and verifiably logged in a way that's very difficult to tamper with later. It builds trust between multiple parties who might not fully trust each other, but can trust the shared ledger.
That does sound incredibly powerful for those specific high-trust use cases. However, as you mentioned, there's the hype and then there's the reality. We often hear about major hurdles. So what are the significant challenges that currently limit the widespread use of blockchain in the IoT space today?
You're right to press on this, because despite the hype, actually applying blockchain effectively to most general IoT scenarios is extremely challenging right now. The source material is pretty clear on this. The single biggest issue is probably the computational overhead and storage requirements. Running the cryptographic operations needed to validate transactions and maintain the blockchain ledger, plus storing a copy of that ever-growing ledger. It's computationally expensive and requires significant storage space.
And most IoT devices are.
Exactly. Most IoT devices are deliberately resource-constrained. They have limited processing power, very limited memory, and are often running on batteries. They simply don't have the horsepower or the storage capacity to participate as full nodes in a typical blockchain network. They drain their batteries in no time or just wouldn't be able to keep up.
So the devices themselves struggle to participate fully. What about the network side, the speed?
That's the other major hurdle, latency. Blockchains rely on a consensus mechanism, a process where the distributed nodes agree on the validity of new transactions before they're added to the chain. This consensus process inherently takes time.
How much time?
It varies depending on the blockchain, but the latency involved in achieving final consensus across the network is often far too high for the kind of real-time or near real-time applications that many IoT systems require. Think about industrial control systems, autonomous vehicles, or even just responsive smart home actions. Decisions often need to be made in milliseconds or seconds. Blockchain confirmation times can be minutes or even longer in some cases. That delay is simply unacceptable for many critical IoT use cases.
So the conclusion is it's not quite ready for prime time in general IoT.
Pretty much. While blockchain absolutely holds theoretical promise for certain specific niche applications, particularly where that strong immutability and decentralized trust are the absolute top priorities, like maybe in some regulatory compliance or high-value asset tracking scenarios, it is not currently a mainstream solution for general-purpose IoT security. It's perhaps more accurate to see it as a potential future tool for specific problems rather than a silver bullet for all IoT security. There's still this fundamental tension. Secure, real-time IoT often relies on speed, efficiency, and lightweight processing, which are frequently at odds with blockchain's inherent resource demands and latency characteristics right now.
That's a very clear-eyed perspective. Okay, this brings us logically to our final question for today's deep dive, wrapping up our focused discussion on the security aspects. To conclude, looking at the big picture, what would you say is the ultimate challenge facing IoT security? And pulling it all together, what are the absolute cornerstones of a robust defense that our listeners should really take away from this?
The ultimate challenge, when you boil it all down, is really one of scale and lifecycle management. We keep touching on scale, but it's fundamental. We're deploying literally billions of these connected devices every year, integrating them into every facet of our personal lives, our businesses, and our critical national infrastructure. The overwhelming question becomes, how do we ensure that these billions upon billions of devices remain secure, not just on the day they are installed, but throughout their entire operational lifespan? That could be 5 years, 10 years, maybe even 20 years for some industrial or infrastructure deployments. Managing security updates, monitoring for threats, handling decommissioning securely across that vast scale and over that long time frame. That is a monumental, ongoing, and incredibly complex challenge.
It truly is. It's not a set it and forget it situation at all. It's a continuous battle, a continuous process, not a one-time fix.
Exactly. It requires sustained effort and investment.
So given that enormous challenge, what are those non-negotiable cornerstones, the absolute must-haves for building any kind of robust defense in this environment?
Based on everything we've discussed and what the source emphasizes, these aren't optional nice-to-haves, they are foundational requirements. First, strong, standardized encryption, like TLS, is utterly essential to protect data in transit. This covers confidentiality, ensuring data can't be read if intercepted. It provides integrity, ensuring data isn't tampered with, and it provides authentication, verifying who you're talking to. Using TLS for all communications is non-negotiable. It's your secure communications tunnel.
Okay, secure the communications path first. Cornerstone number 1.
Cornerstone number 2 is having rigorous authentication and authorization mechanisms in place. Authentication to reliably verify who is connecting, preferably using strong methods like those X.509 certificates we discussed, which scale well. And then strong authorization based squarely on that principle of least privilege to strictly control what that authenticated entity is allowed to do.
So control who gets in and strictly limit what they can do once they are in.
Precisely. It's about designing security from the very beginning, security by design, not trying to somehow bolt it on as an afterthought when it's often too late or ineffective.
And the consequences of failing here are significant, aren't they?
We've seen it. The devastating impact of botnets like Mirai proved years ago that the consequences of widespread IoT insecurity aren't just isolated incidents. They can be systemic, they can be far-reaching, affecting huge parts of the internet and critical services we all rely on.
So the ultimate goal?
The ultimate goal has to be building a kind of digital fortress for our connected infrastructure, one strong enough, adaptable enough, and manageable enough to withstand the ever-evolving threats we see on this modern digital battlefield. The future reliability and trustworthiness of our increasingly connected world really depend on our collective ability to meet this challenge effectively, to keep iterating on defenses, and crucially, to prioritize security as a fundamental pillar of IoT development and deployment, not just a feature or a cost center.
That's a powerful concluding thought. Okay, as we wrap up this deep dive, let's just quickly reiterate some of the most critical takeaways for you, our listeners. We've seen clearly that the IoT attack surface is immense, maybe unprecedented, and persistent vulnerabilities, especially those embarrassingly simple, weak, or default credentials, are still a major danger, a systemic problem we need to fix.
Still number one, unfortunately.
We've also highlighted the absolutely foundational role of strong encryption, using standards like TLS, and the necessity of robust authentication, ideally using X.509 certificates for scale, coupled tightly with strict authorization based on the principle of least privilege. These aren't extras, they're the bedrock.
Build on those foundations.
Right. And while emerging technologies like blockchain show some, tantalizing potential for specific problems down the road, they also come with significant current limitations, especially around device constraints and latency that prevent them from being a general solution today.
Important to keep perspective there.
Absolutely. Ultimately, the message seems clear. Embracing security by design principles from the very start and tackling that huge challenge of effective security lifecycle management across billions of devices are paramount. That's what's needed to ensure the long-term trustworthiness and resilience of our increasingly connected world.
Well summarized.
Now, as we move forward in our exploration of the Internet of Things, the practical application of all these technologies, the security principles, the data analytics we discussed last time, it all becomes paramount. How does it work in the real world?
Where the rubber meets the road.
Exactly. So be sure to tune in for our upcoming series where we'll dive into exactly that. We'll be exploring real-world applications and case studies in the Internet of Things, really bringing these concepts to life with concrete examples.
Looking forward to that one. Should be fascinating.
Me too.
Yeah.
So thank you everyone for joining us today for this deep dive into the critical world of IoT security and privacy. We hope you found this discussion valuable. If you did, please consider subscribing to our channel, Tech AI and Beyond. It really helps us continue bringing you these deep dives and stay informed together on the cutting edge of technology.
Your support is much appreciated.
It truly is. Thanks again for listening, and we look forward to our next session.